invite Pastor Stephen Bruss back up to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Chuck Harding.
Well, I'm really thankful for the young people who took time to memorize and to read these things today. How many of you are enjoying the event so far this morning? Well, it's good to be here today. And let me just say a quick word about your speaker today. When they asked me to pray, of course I've prayed to open this event before, and I appreciate being invited to do that anytime I can. When I was asked to introduce our speaker, I quickly agreed because of the nature of his ministry. Dr. Chuck Harding has a ministry in Washington, D.C. to the United States of America, but also to our legislators and our representatives on Capitol Hill. One of the main purposes of his ministry, which is Awake America, is to help pastors like myself to be able to better understand, to be better educated on how we can interact with our leaders. The theme of their ministry is connecting men of God with men of government. If you go back through the history of the United States, you'll see where pastors and preachers and people of ministry were very influential even in the founding documents of our nation. And so Dr. Harding is here today as part of his ministry, which is a God and Country ministry. He's had this ministry now for several decades. He's been traveling America as an evangelist. He also has some previous experience in Washington, D.C. At one time, he was the Deputy Commander of the Uniform Protective Branch for the Diplomatic Security Services at the State Department. And he is an authority on our founding documents. About 6 years ago, he relocated his ministry to Washington, D.C. I'll let him say a little bit more about what they get to do and some of the doors that God has opened for them. But just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what he's been able to do there and some of the opportunities he's had, their office is really right down the street from the Supreme Court of the United States of America. They've got a presence on Capitol Hill. They're meeting with our representatives, our legislators, on a weekly basis. When Dr. Harding is not in D.C., he's traveling the nation, much like what he's doing here today, and educating people on how to be better connected with our government. And he's going to talk about that today, so I'm going to ask, if you would, to please welcome Dr. Chuck Harding.
Thank you. Be seated. And I so appreciate the opportunity and privilege of being asked to speak here. I always enjoy being able to speak for our country and our founding documents. And a lot of times people say, well, how did you get involved with this? Well, knowing my background, one of my former pastors said, you need to pray about a God and country ministry. And so I did, and answered the call, just like that person right there is about to answer that. But in any case, I started simply going to churches, colleges, schools, and reintroducing to them the miracle of America. You understand, we live in a miraculous nation. Amen. As some of the young people have already told us and recited and wrote about these great documents, these miraculous documents, where back in history, when you look at basically how do millions of people get together without tearing each other apart in the acquisition of sustenance, food and shelter and power, and for centuries the fighting for survival had been a very terrible problem. It started, of course, with the beginning of human history. It took us thousands of years to finally come to a peaceful solution to do this. And when we did, an astonishing thing happened. A totally new way of governing a nation, and peace and prosperity became a reality. And we saw some of the dawning of this over in Europe, with the Bible being copied out into the common language of the common man. And then, of course, hand copied. It took 6 months for one Bible. And then when Gutenberg started his press, it took much shorter time frame, and that meant more Bibles and more people coming to the knowledge of the truth. The Constitution was the culmination of all of this in a government document, because there are 28 biblical principles in the Constitution. It's no accident that our nation, our motto is "In God We Trust."
Right.
And that is something that we need to understand.
Amen.
And that's who we must trust in order to continue this nation and asking Him to bless this nation. Our founding fathers, before they mutually pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, check it out. Our founding fathers said, with firm reliance upon the protection of divine providence, we're going to do just this. And so we see in 4,379 words, the men who framed the Constitution of the United States helped we the people, by the way, who are the government, to actually know how to have a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to promote general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Sure, I'm glad the young people are here today.
Amen.
Because what we're doing today will help them tomorrow.
Amen.
If we don't stand up for these rights as we celebrate and commemorate today, these Bill of Rights, as some of the people here do on a daily basis, I'm talking about Senator Thomas for one, he's like Patrick Henry to me. You say, what are you talking about? Well, you know, Patrick Henry, back in those days, you couldn't even run for office. You understand? You couldn't campaign. If you campaigned, you were immediately disqualified. So the people would simply have the places on the ballot of the particular positions, and you would write the person's name in. Well, Patrick Henry was a governor of a state, and as he began to get a little older, he said, look, I don't want to run again. I don't want to be involved with this. I just want to enjoy, you know, my latter years, and I have grandchildren. I want to enjoy my family. He said, don't vote me in. Well, they voted him in. He said, okay, I'll serve, because he understood that duty is so very important. And I know that Senator Toms and his wife have thought about, well, they've let someone else take care of it, but they realize that the duty has called them to keep these sacred trusts so much a part of our life. Because Ronald Reagan said something I think that merits repetition. He said we're always only one generation away from losing our freedom. We don't pass them on through the blood system. Today we would say through our DNA. They must be protected, preserved, so we can pass them on to the next generation, so that they can have the freedom of thought and be able to do what God has called them to do, no matter what that is. And so I thank Senator Toms today, and let's give him a round of applause. And David and the co-chairs here, I appreciate sharp-looking, smart young people that have already grabbed a hold of the idea of the fact that we have a And so as we look to history, it's his story. That's where we get that term from. And we must understand from whence we came. One of our presidents said we're doing a futile thing if we do not know what we've been all about. If we don't know to the past, we have no idea what's coming in the future.
Right.
So we must be students. That's what you call a circumspect walk, because everything that's going on right now has been determined by the past. And we can either do one thing or the other. We can kind of stumble into the future, or we can walk wisely, because the past is prologue. And there is nothing new under the sun. And so we're here today to, once again, just kind of understand who we are, so that we can protect that and preserve it. The way that I got involved in this was simply by starting to talk to people and reintroduce these truths of our country, so very unique to us. You think about this, in world history, there are only two nations on earth that started from the truth of God's Word. The nation of Israel and the United States of America. All other nations, if they do at all, they come to the truth, or have come to the truth. Even Great Britain, with their great missionary efforts of yesteryear, they didn't start with the truth. Two nations have started with the truth, only two. Israel and America. That makes us a very unique people. Not that we're better than anyone else. We're no better than anyone. But our founding fathers, the men that got together and signed a document, you think about that document, the Declaration of the original 13 colonies, which was a parchment, the skin of an animal. They signed it with a goose quill pen, the feather of a bird. And when they fixed their names on it, we today are still beneficiaries of what they did all those years ago. They signed a document that said this: we no longer want a king over this country. From now on, our king is going to be the sovereign of man's souls, because we're going to go back to what Israel did when they had the judges. And after the Declaration of Independence was ratified, the cry went out, no king but King Jesus. I don't know about you, that gets me excited. And that's how our nation began, and that's how we need to continue. Our king is Jesus. Our God is really the one that oversees this nation. Our God is the God that oversees this country. And so when we fight, we don't fight for king or queen. We fight for truths that are put down in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Now, I started, and someone asked me to just share their story by continuing to go all over this country, crisscross from coast to coast and border to border, and just give constitutional awareness conferences and some other God and country concepts. And so finally, I was asked to go and to meet with John Ashcroft, former Attorney General of the United States, and he told us some things. And then after that meeting, I was asked to go and address some of the conservative leadership in the House of Representatives. And what I told them was this. I said, everything that we do in governing this nation, we need to get back to, you might say, the playbook. Yeah. And they all looked at me. I said, we need to understand that we must go back to the Constitution of the United States. Millions of Americans are ready and willing to back up a constitutional agenda, right. But we must be constitutional.
That's right.
And I said that, and I was walking down the hall then, and this was the last time that the Conservative Party was not in the majority. They were about to come back into the majority, and of course now they've lost the majority in the House, and we'll see what goes on there, but in any case, that's another story. But in any case, they were about to regain it through a midterm election, and a lady came up to me that was in that particular meeting, and she said, tell me a little bit more about yourself. I said, okay, and I did. And she said, well, we need people like you on Capitol Hill. I really appreciate what you had to say about the Constitution. She said, I'm going to give you a short list. You can use that. You can start basically getting connected with the members here and their staff, and you can use my name. It'll hopefully maybe open some doors for you. And I said, and who are you? She said, my name's Jenny Thomas. My husband works across the street. And when she went like that, we were standing in the Capitol. She was kind of looking like she was going towards the Supreme Court. And her last name was Thomas. And so she continued to talk. I said, your husband works across the street, Jenny? She said, yeah, he works across the street. I said, is his first name Clarence by any chance? She said, yes. Yeah. I said, Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice? She said, yeah, he works across the street. So, I mean, on the outside, I was trying to contain myself, but on the inside, I was jumping out of my socks, okay? And she was a woman of her word, and she gave us that name and those names, and we started visiting, and God started opening doors now. Every Wednesday, we walk into the White House complex, and we have a Bible study with the Vice President's office, right in the Vice President's office. His Bible study, he's not always there, but he has a actual Bible study in his office every Wednesday. We're there. And we're talking with Value Action team members and other people that basically are trying to work their way through this minutia of the liberal onslaught of our rights and privileges. Now, the Bill of Rights, of course, as it's already been mentioned briefly, was talked about and instilled because Our founding fathers said something. The chain to chain down the beast isn't strong enough. It needs a few more links in the chain. Because our founding fathers knew that the government will always be the beast. Because they understood in Daniel that the world's governments are actually related to the beast. Our founding fathers said, never turn your back on the beast. Keep it chained down. If it gets loose, it'll start eating its own. And what's happened? You see, three things have been guaranteed to us, unalienable to us. Number one is life. Number two is liberty. Number three is the pursuit of happiness. It was property, but then Ben Franklin knew there was some intellectual property, so he kind of expanded that a little bit. But life is under attack.
Right.
And the reason why is because our Constitution that guarantees the right to life has basically been ignored by our judiciary, where 7 out of 9 people back in 1973 said something that they should have never said, ever decided upon, and that was that life begins at birth and not in the womb. I don't know about you. What that has done is released the beast, and he has killed over 60 million of our citizens under the guise of abortion. Now, no matter what your thoughts are there, these are things that are biblical, constitutional, and historical.
Right.
And we must once again understand. I'm glad my mother didn't believe in abortion. Aren't you? Yes. And so there was a man by the name of John Leland, and he actually was a pastor. And he got with James Madison. And I was in the exact area that they met, which now is a little park. It was a meeting place then. And he said this. He said, John Leland said, look, I will run and I will go to the Constitutional Convention, but I'd rather not, because I'm a pastor and I'm going to basically, I want to stay here and preach. But if we get you elected, will you promise me that you will put forward the Bill of Rights? And he gave him some things that needed to be put forward. And he said, I'll give you my word. And of course, he was a man of his word, and he went, and one of the very first things that we see, of course, is that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Right? The next one was what? Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is very important, because what we have to understand is this, is that the freedom of speech is the most fundamental of all of our natural rights. History shows when this right is absent, many of the others simply fall because people are afraid to speak out against violations. And the freedom of expression and discontent and anger, even at our government's actions, is vital to preserve a free and open society. Problem with that is, right now, there are people that are trying to limit the freedom of speech. And when they're doing that, they're limiting the freedom of religion and all the rest, the freedom of the press, the freedom to peaceably assemble, by the way, riots and prohibiting vehicular or pedestrian traffic or bullying people is not protected by the Constitution or Bill of Rights. Understand that? Peaceably assembling. And then redressing our grievances to our government, again, is something that we get to do that most people throughout the history of the world has not had that chance to do. And it's all because of the freedom of speech. But now, think about this now, it's criticized, and under the banner of tolerance, the freedom of speech is being attacked in a stealth manner. So that's why. That is, someone should be allowed, of course, to defame religion, lifestyle choices, morals. But what I'm saying is this is a slippery slope as well. We allow the concrete right, like a freedom to express our opinions, regardless if they're popular or friendly. It's limiting the arbitrary decisions. We open the door to future arbitrary decisions and limitations. So what I'm saying is, you should be able to, unless you're trying to defame someone with lies, even though I may disagree with you, you should still have your right to express your opinion. But now, those that are yelling tolerant are the most intolerant. I mean, they can say whatever they want to, but we can't say what we want to. And they're actually trying to say, no, you can't say anything about religion here. Well, yeah, I can. I can say anything that I want to about who Jesus is and what I believe anywhere. As much as any other faith has that same type of freedom to express their beliefs, you see. And that's part of being American. I may not agree with you, but you should have the right to say that, as long as it's not inflammatory or trying to bring violence or danger or defame someone in such a way as character assassination. And so how do we do this? Well, we do this simply by understanding something that we, all of us, are stewards of liberty. I want to read you something here that I believe is so very important, because it's, when we come to the Bill of Rights, truly I believe that it's important for us to understand what some people have said in previous contexts as to who and what we are. And that, of course, being the Bill of Rights and looking to the freedom of speech. Ben Franklin said, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, no such thing as public liberty, without freedom of speech. It says in James chapter 1, the book of James in the Bible, for whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. So what he's talking about there, the perfect law of liberty. For most of the world's history, there have been great nations of law. But law without liberty, that's tyranny. There have been times in history where those great nations have toppled, and there's been anarchy. But what is anarchy? Anarchy is liberty without law. So you have law without liberty, that's tyranny. You have liberty without law, that's anarchy. We don't want either of those. In the French Revolution, what happened? You had really no law, and you had a bunch of people lose their heads, literally, with the Madame Guillotine, okay? But here in America, we had a group of men that looked into the Bible, and they saw something. Wait a minute, a perfect law of liberty, a balance between the two? How do we achieve that? We achieve that through looking to biblical standards. In fact, a lot of people, they think that James Madison was the architect of the Constitution. He even says himself, he wasn't. All of his ideas, to the great extent, were shot down. He said we had to go to the governor of the universe. And the governor of the universe, he said, answered our questions and met our needs as a people. The triform of government. All found in Isaiah 33 and verse 22. Separation of powers with a balance of power. Jeremiah 17 and verse 9, for the heart of man is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Even the republic, a multi-layered representational government, is all in Exodus 18. And it's all spelled out for us in each and every one of these facets of biblical truth. That, of course, we have in the Bible. Even our immigration system, which is under such attack today, is all spelled out in the Constitution, because it was, first of all, spelled out in the Bible, where God tells Israel, the stranger among you shall be as one born. The stranger that dwelleth with you shall be as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. So you come here to America. Now you need to come legally, because we're a land of laws. You need to learn the language and say you're going to uphold the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But you know, this is the only nation on earth where you can come and you can become an American. You can't go to Spain and be a Spaniard. You understand that, right? You can't go to France and be a Frenchman. Now, I'm from, my grandmother, she was Irish. She was an Irish lady. She was about this tall. And she had given birth to many children. She had a family of 11. But you didn't mess with my Irish grandmother. I remember one time I was a little boy, and I was messing around. I was about 5 years old. And my Irish grandmother said, if you don't behave yourself, I'm going to put the come hither in you. Now, I didn't know what the come hither was, but it didn't sound good. And she said, come over here, come over here. So I walked over to and I was 5, and she's just a little lady. And I looked up at her and I said, yes, Grandma. She said, if you don't behave, I'm going to give you to the Sheeny man. Now, she had it timed perfectly. I didn't know who the Sheeny man was, but at that exact moment, here came this man driving a draft horse down the alleyway where their backyards would come together, and he was pulling a cart, and they would give him their recyclables, things that didn't work, he'd melt them down, or he'd try to fix them, and he was the ugliest looking guy I ever saw in my life, okay? It looked like God made him as ugly as he could and then scared him real bad, okay? You know what I mean? He was all gnarled up, he had a stogie sticking out of his mouth, and he sang a little ditty to let the people know they could bring the stuff out. He said, I'm the seedy man, I'm the seedy man. She said, I'm going to give it to him. I said, well, what do you want me to do, Grandma? In her Irish brogue, she said, don't be standing around with 2 arms at one length. Do something with yourself, son. Well, what do you want me to do, Grandmother? Well, here's some silver. She called change silver. Here's some silver. Go down to the corner store there and buy yourself some penny candy, but don't be frolic with your money. I have no idea what frolic means, Grandma. Keep the change coming. I'll keep out of your way, okay? My response to her. But look, I'm not an Irish American. I'm an American.
Right.
You know why? Because this is a miraculous nation. That's why. This is a country born out of sacrifice, out of service, out of sacred prayer. Sacred prayer. These men looked into the perfect law of liberty. They were not forgetful hearers, but they were doers of the work. What do you mean? The 56 men that signed that Declaration of Independence, what they said was they were putting everything on the line. I'm not going to call you up today to put your life savings, basically, and commit them here. I'm not going to call you up today to put your family and your grandchildren, everyone else in jeopardy. I'm not going to call you up today to put everything on the line, but they did. That day when they signed the Declaration of Independence, and then later on signed the Constitution of the United States. But out of the 56 men that signed the Declaration, you understand, only 6 of them made it back to sign the Constitution. Why? Because many of them had paid dearly. Some of them with their wealth, some of them in the damage of their families, and some of them with their lives. 6 of them made it back. Ben Franklin was one of those 6. And what he said to the men that was surrounding the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was this. He stood up and he said to them, we need to remember our faithful friend. And what we've not done here, because they had argued for 5 weeks, do you understand how we almost didn't get this done? Say, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that we almost didn't have the Constitution. We almost fell apart. And at that critical point, something happened. In fact, if you ever come to Washington, D.C., how many have been to Washington, D.C.? How many have seen Constitution Avenue? Seen Constitution Avenue? That used to be a canal, a water canal, that we used to exchange our goods and services between the 13 states. And there's a canal house that they just renovated. Tell you how things work and how God works this all out. And that canal house would, as the boats coming in before the advent of railroads or any type of trucking, the boats would come in and they would weigh the boats for the goods and services. It went all the way to the Capitol and then turned and emptied out into another waterway. But they had locks, and all of our states were connected with canals. There's a working aspect of that still in Georgetown. But they would weigh the things and they would tax people, but we were taxing each other. We were more like 13 different countries instead of 13 states. And so the tax between each one, and George Washington said, look, this is not working for us. We need to be prosperous. We need to go forward. We need to be more united, at least in business, so let's have a canal convention. They had a canal convention. He brought everyone in, and it was an amazing success. They standardized everything, and the prosperity of our country financially just started flourishing, and people started getting more goods and services exchanged from one state to another. It was so successful that George Washington said, hey, let's come back and let's try to devise a more perfect union with the Constitution of the United States, because the Articles of Confederation aren't working. And so when they filled that canal in, that's why they called that Constitution Avenue. Because that canal and the Canal Convention led to the Constitutional Convention. That's how things kind of work. But these men, they were not forgetful hearers. They were doers of the work. And we, you see, are beneficiaries of what they did. They did something so miraculous. They got together, and for 5 weeks, first of all, they argued, and they were about to disband. Ben Franklin stands up and says, one of the more liberal founding fathers, you might say, but he beat them over the head with the fact that when they were in that same room and really subject to fear and terror of the British, one thing they did then they weren't doing at the Constitutional Convention was pray. And so they started to pray. And actually, after Ben Franklin spoke, they broke, and for 3 days and 3 nights, they prayed together. Some of them prayed and fasted and even attended church services. And they came back together after 3 days, and everything changed. They had a spirit of reconciliation and a spirit of cooperation, and some of them started saying, okay, let's do this. And they started looking into the Bible. And they started realizing that, wow, this is amazing that God has laid it out already for us in the Bible. And that's why they continued on with the basic idea of who we were and executed it in the Bill of Rights through the Constitution and given it to us. Now, who are we? We are the stewards. You say, why is that? Well, because we're the only ones that understand the true liberty of man is generated from God. You say, really? Yeah, because God says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And why we have so much liberty in America is because this was founded as a Christian nation. Amen. Now, sometimes we don't act like it, but we are still a Christian nation because we need more of God's people to understand something. The Bible also says the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, neither can he know them. They're foolishness unto him, neither can he know them. So the natural man, you see, is adverse to liberty. That's why we need to understand that we, as the people that know who God is, in our faith of our lives, understand that the Holy Spirit gives us liberty. We sing that song, My Country 'Tis of Thee, right? You know what it should be entitled? God, our country is because of you. And we actually call him the author of liberty. See, we remembered at one time where they got all these wonderful, miraculous ideas for the Bill of Rights. We remember that. But they got them from the Bible, you see. Right. So we need to be cognizant of that. And no matter what your opinion is of one faith or another, we need to realize that that's why we're the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of mankind. And we have the most miraculous governmental document in the history of mankind because it's based on the most miraculous document, the Bible.
That's right.
Amen. That's what young people need to get a hold of and grab. This didn't come by accident.
Right.
No.
This didn't come simply because of the genius of men. Yes, they were men of genius, but they referred to the author of liberty himself. And that's why we have this document, most miraculous, most powerful. And there are even people that say, well, we need a convention of states to redo some things. You know what we need to do first before we do anything? We need to learn the Constitution. Because most people have never even read it. I'm glad for the essay. I'm glad for these young people up here reciting this. You know something that happened when the majority got back into the House after the Lord put it in my mind and heart to say, you need to get back to the Constitution? For the first time in our history, they read the Constitution in its entirety from the floor of the House. And that's what we need to get back to again. That's the first time that it ever happened. My wife said, it's because of what you said. I said, no, it's not because of what I said. It's because of God.
Amen.
Yeah.
And His grace to us. And so we need to understand, we are the stewards. How on earth can you explain color to a blind man? And if the Holy Spirit of God is the author of liberty, how can people that don't believe in God understand what liberty is? You ever try to explain green to a blind man? I had tried to describe green to my cousin Johnny when I was 5 and he was 10, and I couldn't get it done. And I can still remember exactly where I was. In fact, I was back in a lot of great things happened at my grandmother's house. I was at my grandmother's house too. She wasn't out there at the time, or she would probably have said, But I was just a thoughtless 5-year-old, and I told my cousin Johnny, who was blind, oh, the grass is so green today, the sky is so blue. And Johnny said, what's green? I couldn't put it into words. It shocked me. When someone that doesn't know God says, what do you mean, what's life? That's just tissue in that mother's womb. No, it's life. God says so. It's a human being. And even DNA proves that a woman, they scream, I can do what I want to with my own body. DNA proves that's a different body.
That's right.
Yes.
You want to be scientific? There's science for you.
Yep.
You see. And so what we have to understand is the fact that we are stewards of liberty because we know God and we know where our rights come from and how and why they are displayed here. I mean, you think about it, 28 firm biblical principles in our Constitution. This is a miracle that we wake up in every day. A literal miracle. I was over in China a few years ago preaching at a house church, and they have to walk in 2 by 3. They can't walk in all together. They can't sing too loud. And while I was preaching in one house church in Beijing, another one was being raided. Because you're not allowed to form even groups like this in some countries to talk about rights. If we were in other countries, I'll guarantee you there'd be someone standing at the door giving us warning when we're about to be raided and arrested. But the reason why we can sit here and talk about this wonderful thing called the Bill of Rights is because someone else died in order for us to be here. Yeah. And by the way, any veteran out there, thank you for what you've done. Thank you. But see, veterans fight for this. And there in Washington, D.C., right behind the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, in the asp of a particular place where they direct their speeches to people that come to commemorate our honored dead, it says, George Washington, when we put on the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen. Why? Because we're citizen soldiers, because we fight as we the people. By the way, the government doesn't sit in your state house, nor in the nation's capital. I'm looking at the government right here. We're the government, we the people. That's how our document begins. So as stewards, we have to understand, have to appreciate, and realize. By understanding, by appreciation, hopefully we get more of a commitment. I get so excited when I see young people and the fact that they're getting a hold of some of this stuff, because most of them aren't. Most of them are being brainwashed in institutions of higher education that no longer are trying to just give an education. They're trying to indoctrinate them with socialism, which is one step away from communism. And we have a republic that's an amazing thing that gives us the greatest standard of living in the world. And it excites me when I see young people that actually are getting some of this.
Yeah.
Understanding the republic is something that God has birthed here. In fact, it was kind of interesting. I was in a White House briefing, and someone said, well, what about the affordable health care? And it was a pretty big area. And I said, well, it's not affordable. It's not care. Okay? And it's not, it's a tax. That's what it is. It's unaffordable and it's control. And millions of people understand if you want to do something about health care, all I got to do is give it back to the free market, privatize it over state lines, and it's fixed. I said, but here's the thing, what we don't realize. He said, go ahead. I said, okay. And I said, the Liberal Party, they say they have a good idea to socialize medicine. And then the Conservative Party says, oh, we have a better idea of how to socialize medicine. I said, you understand, socializing medicine has never worked anywhere in the world, any time in history. And you know what Einstein said? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And we said, that's right. I said, we just need to give it to the free market system, privatize it over state lines. Well, the next morning, how you can be an influence. The next morning on Fox News, Newt Gingrich said, you know, Einstein said the definition of insanity is, hey! He has a much bigger following than I do, you know, but I'm glad that the Lord allows us just to put those tidbits of truth wherever we can in Washington, D.C. Why? Because it protects the next generation. It protects this guy, this guy, this guy with the flag. Protects this young lady that wrote that speech, and these two young ladies, and this fella here, and this guy, and that guy back there. How you doing? Good to see you. And some of these young people may not get everything that I'm talking about. But we, especially this one here, he's just playing with the flag. He has no idea what's going on. He's in mom's lap. You know what, that's okay. You know why? Because what he knows is this is important to mom and dad, and because of that, one day it will be important to him. That's why we're here. That's why we make much of the Bill of Rights. Because it gives us the freedom of religion to preach, the freedom of the press, the freedom to express ourselves, the freedom to go in. Hey, I walked in the other day and I was in a meeting and we stood up and we said, hey, you know what? Churches should not ever be taxed. Even at the fringe, a church, and they want to start taxing pastors and paid employees to park in their own parking lots. And that's something that is in the new tax law, and we're trying to get their appeal. I said, I don't care how many pastors it affects, it's going to intertwine pastors with starting to fill out the IRS forms, and that is just the nose of the camel in the tent. So I'm able to address that, and because of that, now we have actually a repeal that's been submitted that hopefully they'll vote on before they recess, and the new group comes in January, and oh my, I'm not going to tarry there. You know what's coming. But so first of all, in understanding where our rights come from, we need to understand also that in every generation, the world has always produced enemies of freedom, and they've always attacked America because America is freedom's home. And it's always been its defender. That's why they attack us. And the true liberty of man is to know and obey and enjoy his Creator, and then to do all the good unto it, enjoy all the happiness with his fellow citizens. And so we have to realize that we people that know God, we're the stewards. And to know that it is from God, that's very important. Number two, I think we need to do something else. What's that? We need to guard it. That's what we're doing here. We're guarding these liberties and teaching our young people to guard these liberties. Why? Because liberty is fragile. Right outside of the National Archives. You young people ever been in the National Archives? You been there? Have you? Haven't yet? You been there? You been there? You been there? Seen the original documents? Seen the original Bill of Rights? I'm telling you, talk about goosebumps. You know what's outside, etched in granite? These words. Eternal vigilance. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And what took a monumentous effort, a monumental effort to obtain, takes only a careless lack of concern to lose. You know what happens to people? They get so peaceful, so prosperous, that prosperity lulls them into complacency and apathy. Oh, well, I just don't have time to go to this Bill of Rights thing. Oh, I just don't have time to go and read some of the issues and know how to vote. Or the next step down is apathy. I just don't care. I don't care. You know why Senator Thomas and his wife and others had to go out and actually campaign? To pull people out of their complacency.
That's right.
Because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten out and voted. You know why we lost the House and the majority of the conservatives? Because Christians didn't go out and vote. That's why. And I understand they were, yes, some of them disillusioned, but just because we get disillusioned doesn't mean we stop fulfilling our duty as a Christian. I mean, I was watching a World War II documentary on the way here from the men that fought in World War II. And I saw the documented footage of the bodies of the men wounded and the pain on their faces. My dad was a World War II veteran. And they fought, and many of them died in order to give us the right to vote.
That's right.
And if we don't do something as simple as that, there's the problem.
Yeah.
We fall asleep. That's why I named this ministry Awake America. We fall asleep, you see. And look, may I say this? The future of our country will never be in the hand of the liberal or the unbeliever unless we give place to them.
Right.
But if we give place to them, they'll take it. Otherwise, it's ours. The stewardship of liberty belongs to us, you see. And even with the rise and fall of Rome, I'll read you a few things here. I think it's kind of interesting. We must be vigilant. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire, think about this, completed 1787 by Edward Gibbon. You think about some of the things that happened in Rome. History repeats itself, and it's repeating itself right here in America. See if you don't see America reflected in some of these things that are going on in ancient Rome before it fell. From the inside, by the way, imploding. Number one, the rapid increase of divorce. The undermining of the dignity and sanctity of the home, which is the basis of human society, and increasing obsession with sex. Ancient Rome, see that in America today? Number two, higher and higher taxes and spending of public money for free bread and circuses for the populace, and increasing desire to live off the state. See that in America today? Thankfully, under this administration, we have a whole lot less people under welfare. A lot more jobs have been produced, and a lot more people have gone back to work. And that's a wonderful thing about this administration. Okay? Number three, the mad craze for pleasure. Sports becoming more and more exciting, more brutal, enthusiasms, pretending to be creativity, and freakishness in the arts. See, the arts kind of display where we are as a people. I've been down to the National Art Gallery. I know which galleries to go into and which ones I shouldn't go into. But there are some that I've gone into, and I've seen paintings that look like someone tripped over buckets of paint and they splattered on the canvas and they hung it up. And I've actually heard conversations that have gone just like this. One person wants to know, and another person is a self-proclaimed authority. So I've stood right there, these two people are talking, and they're looking at this painting with the splattering of paint, all different colors, all of this thing, and the person said, well, what's that? And the self-proclaimed authority said, well, that's a great work of art. Oh, how much is that worth? Oh, well, that is priceless. Oh, well, what's that entitled? Oh, that is entitled Man's Inner Struggle with Self. And I feel like saying, yes, and he lost right there. It looks like someone got sick on a canvas and they hung it up. You know what art's supposed to do? Art is supposed to display absolute truth. Relativism, you know what that says in the arts? Oh, it is whatever you think it is. That also creates dehumanism. That there is no right and wrong, it's whatever you think it is. No. There is an absolute right. And there are wrongs, and those are all reflected in God's Word, the Bible, you see. So we need to realize these things and understand something today more than ever. We have Americans willing to give up precious liberties for the perceived safety of government handouts. And may I say this? Those that are willing to give up liberties, freedom for free stuff, it's never a good deal. Because a government that can do anything for you can't do anything to you.
Correct.
And that's why we shouldn't want the government to do anything for us that we can do for ourselves.
Amen.
Daniel Webster said, God grants liberty only to those who love it and always are ready to defend it. Here is the wonderful hope for our country. It doesn't take the majority. It has always taken the minority. Really? Yes. Do you understand why when Paul Revere rode through the city, he wasn't crying the British are coming? Did you know that? That's what our textbooks say. He was crying through the townships, the British are coming! No, he didn't do that. Well, how do you know? Well, because I've read his journal, okay? And only 1/3 of the populace were on the side of liberating ourselves from Great Britain. You understand that? 1/3. 2/3 were not on our side. Only 1/3. We fought with the minority. He was going to one man's house. You know why? Because he knew two of our founding fathers were there that the British wanted to kill. The rest of the founding fathers, they said, capture them, we'll deal with them later, but if you find these two guys, hang them at the nearest tree. First guy, he was John Hancock. He was the guy that signed his name nice and large on the Declaration of Independence. You know why? Because he knew the king needed reading glasses that he didn't always have with him. So when the king unfolded that document, he said, the first name that I want him to be able to read with or without his reading glasses is my name. Because he knew John Hancock was wealthy, he was a gentry, that was royalty in America. That's a whole other story that people don't understand, our founding fathers being royalty here. I mean, a caste system, they turned their back on that when they signed the document. They said, our concern is the common man. That's amazing. You know how many times that's happened in history? Except for that one. You couldn't buy your way into the gentry. You couldn't marry into the gentry. You had to be born a gentry in America. But they turned their back on all of that. John Hancock, he said John Bull, which was a nickname for the king, will double the price on my head. Well, he did. And then the other guy that they wanted to hang immediately was the original Tea Party guy, Samuel Adams, who had the Tea Party in Boston. We won't go there, right? You know about that, right? He said, hey, you want a good cup of tea? Bring a lump of sugar and some cream and just dip your cup in anywhere you want to at the Boston Harbor. It's going to be one big teapot tonight. Why? Because the British said, you unload this tea and we're going to tax you grievously. He said, fine, we'll unload it just seaward, not landward, okay? And, so we got that fixed. But they hated him and they wanted him dead. Well, Paul Revere, along with William Dawes and Cheswell Wentworth. By the way, Cheswell Wentworth was a heroic black man. The black people had a very critical role in the founding of our nation. Something else that hasn't been told in our history books. He wrote Boston, but Paul Revere. Why did they use Paul Revere's name? Because it rhymed. That's how. Okay? We won't go there. All right. So he walks in to a man's house by the name of Jonas Clark. And sure enough, those three men are there. He had a pretty good idea because there was a relationship between John Hancock and the man of the house. And they all stood up and they said, gentlemen, the British are on the move. I saw the two lanterns in the Old North Church and they're going to probably be coming westward here. Why? You know why? The Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. That predates the Constitution. You know, that was the thing that broke the back of the camel. That was a straw that broke the back of the camel as they were coming to take our weapons and stores of ammunition. Amen? They had tried negotiation, but when the British were coming to take our stores of ammo in Lexington and Concord, that was it. So he said, gentlemen, they're on the move. They're coming here. And John and Sam, they want your heads. They both looked at their host. You know what their host was? His name was Jonas Clark. You know who Jonas Clark was? He was a pastor. And you know who the Minutemen were? They were all men of his church. Do you know where the bell alarm sounded to bring those Minutemen out on Lexington Green the next day in April? From the bell tower of his church. And they stood there, over 100 men, facing off 800 British regulars. And the British regulars cursed them and said, lay down your arms, you rebels! And they just stood their ground. And they didn't fire first. You know why? Because they're all loyal, obedient members of Jonas Clark's church, who said, don't fire first. Because God is going to bless a war of defense much more than a war of offense. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. And sure enough, the first shot rang out from the British side. The shot heard round the world. And before the skirmish ended, 18 men lay dead and or dying. on Lexington Green, all members of a pastor's church. That's how America began. Because pastors stood up and told the people, you have certain rights that God's given to all men. And for the first time in history, aside from the nation of Israel, you're going to be able to actually stand up for those rights. Those Bill of Rights that we see now reflected in our most sacred documents, based upon the most sacred document, the Bible. That's why we need to continue to stay informed, get educated, get engaged with your government.
Yeah.
I mean, entreat God's mercy upon our country. Encourage others to do the same. This is a good turnout today, but we should have this place overflowing. Amen? But I'm encouraged just with this, because again, God says He uses the minority. He didn't use Gideon's 300,000, did He?
No.
He used Gideon's 300.
Yes.
Because He always gets the glory that way, does He
Yes,
not?
He does.
And so we need to understand, hey, and never be demotivated because there's not a big turnout. Hey, these two young people here, you need to get behind these young people over here and encourage them. Continue to ask them to run forward. Why? Because if we lose our country, it won't be because a foreign nation took us over from without. It'll be because we didn't take earnest heed to these things that we're talking about today. So, brethren, you've been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. More than ever today, we need to understand these things and realize the last thing is that true liberty always comes from great personal sacrifice. That means if someone wants to live free, someone else has to be willing to die. I had the unique privilege of going over to Normandy, France, years ago to lecture for a officers in training school. And the gentleman that I was sitting next to, and I didn't know this, on the flight over for 7 hours through the night to Caen, France, and then we drove to Normandy, was a veteran from D-Day. And so, I mean, I pulled on his ear all night long. And he was 84 at the time. And knowing that, I said, no, he's probably 96 today. I said, do you want to get some sleep? He said, no, you have another question? Oh, yeah. All night long I kept that poor guy up. And I learned and gleaned from someone that lived history. The next few days we got to know each other a little bit better. And I remember I was standing there on that area of beach that we called Omaha. And I was told within the first 15 minutes of the A assault team coming on board, 190 men died right there. First 15 minutes. By the first day, over 2,000 had fallen. And the number continually increased by the thousands. Bill was standing next to me. That day, of course, beautiful sunny day. D-Day was not. You've seen the footage. It was raining, it was overcast, cold. The bunkers where the Nazis were shooting at our men, they were still there. Some of the obstructions that the Nazis had put into the beach, very rusted, but they were still there, believe it or not, from the 40s. I asked Bill, I said, you know, I've never been shot at in combat. And I was freeborn. And you understand, if you're freeborn, and you've never worked for your liberty, you have to work at appreciating your liberty. You understand that?
Yes.
Isn't that part of human nature? If we don't work for something, we need to work at appreciating it. Huh? Just give you this example. How old are you? 14. Okay. When I turned 16, the day before I turned 16, my dad and I had gone to a police auction, and he bought me a little sports car for $60. Those days are gone. Okay? Nice little sports car, real wood dash, 4 on the floor. And my dad and I worked on it together. I can still remember that, some precious memories. We worked on that thing together. Put a new clutch and pressure plate in it for $25. So total, we had $85 in the car. Put some tires on it that we bought secondhand, cross-tread Pirelli racing tires. Convertible, beautiful little sports car, little Triumph from the 50s, 1956. But this was in the 60s, so it was still a viable little car. My dad told me before I turned 16 and got my license, he said, son, I've been driving for 25 years and I've never received a ticket. I want you to match my record. You shouldn't have bought me a sports car. Because I turned 16 the next day, got my license, and my first speeding ticket. I was not enjoying my birthday. I went home and I told my mother, she said, don't say anything to your dad until he's eating his dinner. Smart lady, my mom. And so he ate his dinner. Everyone left except for 3 people at the table. It was myself and my dad and my little sister that wanted to watch the fireworks. But I'm thankful for her now because as I approached the subject, I said, Dad, I don't think I'm going to quite match your driving record. And he frowned and my little sister started giggling. As you sisters do sometimes. And he looked at the glee on her face and the consternation on my face. And he put 2 and 2 together and said, what happened, son? I said, I got my first ticket today. And there was silence, as if in eternity. Finally, my dad said, seeing the humor in the thing, he said, well, I guess the pressure's off. And it was. But I want to tell you, I didn't appreciate that little car. You know why? I was a 16-year-old. My dad, he gave it to me, but I didn't have to work for it. He should have made me work for it. The first car that I really appreciated was a car that I worked for. And then I got it. Ah, that's it. I appreciate it because I worked for it. See, unless you're a veteran, none of us have worked for the liberty that we enjoy today. Under the Bill of Rights, within our Constitution. Someone else worked for it. If you're a veteran, you worked for it. And we thank you, veterans, for working for it. And of course, as that old saying goes, freedom is not free. And the price of freedom and the value of freedom is known only to those who have actually fought it. The rest of us have to work at it. So I'm standing there next to Woody. And I'm saying, actually his name was Bill, sorry. Bill, I said, Bill, tell me what it was like. And you could see him stop. And probably he wouldn't talk about this much, but he was right there. He said, well, he said, as far as you could see, ships and boats of every size and description. He said, sometimes when I looked up at the night sky, it was almost overcast with planes bringing in munitions. He said, I know I wasn't there on D-Day proper. I was there D-Day plus 1 or 2. And the way I know is because when the troop transport came up to the beach, the front end of it dropped. We could see the bodies of our fellas strewn all over that beachhead in every imaginable position. We looked around, some of them floating in the water, their lifeblood ebbing out. He said we were respectful as we stepped over their bodies, and some of them were still alive. So we bent down and took our canteen, cradled their head, gave them some water. And our commander came over and said, gentlemen, these fellows are going to have to wait for the next available medic. Our orders are clear. We are to push in and engage the enemy. It's far from over. And there were medics there, just not enough. I thought to myself, I need to think about that more often and work at appreciating my liberty by understanding someone died. And then I thought to myself, what puts it into the American serviceman's mind and heart to run directly into machine gun fire? Loving life? What makes that a part of our whole dynamics in our psyche as Americans? Maybe those guys seeing their buddy that they went through boot camp with, they know their name, they know where they're from, they know their parents or their sweetheart or their wife. They've seen the pictures. and you see that friend of yours run and he gives his life for a few feet on a beachhead. And then you run past him, knowing that he's dead and you fall. And then your friend runs past you and he falls. And that is repeated over and over again as the machine guns continue their report from those cement bunkers until finally you get close enough to the seawall to engage the enemy. I thought to myself, what on earth puts it in the minds of 16, 17-year-olds? Many of them lied about their age because they wanted to fight for their country. 18, 19-year-olds, 20-some-year-olds. And then God, in that still small voice, and of course I've read it many times since, said this: greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And we need to understand the price of the Bill of Rights, his life. As we read them, contemplate, write articles about them, recite them, have organizations to commemorate them, to keep them within our mind and our heart, and may we always remember the price that was paid. And might we tell others and live our lives in such a way that we tell others our country is a miracle. Miraculous. The Constitution Bill of Rights is a miraculous document because it's born out of the miracle of sacrifice. And sacrifice defines us as Americans. And you know where it all comes from? Again, knowing that it says, in God we trust on our monuments, from the greatest sacrifice in time and eternity, where Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. And he said, I love you this much, as he held out his hands and allowed them to nail them to the cross. That is the ultimate sacrifice. And that's why America is. For the freedom civilly, so that we can have the freedom spiritually. And I know this isn't a church service, but may I say this? I'm glad that I'm free from the tyranny of man, and I'm infinitely more joyful that I'm also free from the tyranny of sin.
Yeah.
From the penalty of sin, from the power of sin, and one day from the very presence of sin when God calls us home. Because I've accepted Jesus as my Savior.
Yes.
Because when I was 21, I looked to God and said this: I know I'm a sinner. And I know I cannot save myself. But I'm sorry for my sin. I know my wages of sin is going to send me to hell, but the gift of eternal life that you gave through your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, I can accept it like anyone else can. And I accept it right now, turning my back on my old life and turning to you for a new life. And I prayed that simple prayer. Jesus Christ came into my heart and saved my soul. And pulled me up out of the miry clay and set me upon a solid rock and established my goings. No matter what happens, my home forever is eternity with Jesus in heaven. We have a dual citizenship. We live in the greatest nation on earth, America. We're citizens here. And I hope every person here today under the sound of my voice, if you're not, you become a citizen of heaven as well by accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That's our Bill of Rights. Our nation was not born out of revolution. Our nation was born out of revival. So many people came to the knowledge of the truth that was the very thing that solidified us. To do something unheard of, to stand against the greatest military in the world, Great Britain, and say, we believe we're going to win because we believe God is going to fight for us. Not that He's on our side, that we are on His side. That's America. And that's why we say, in God we trust. And so thank you so much for being here. And I hope that these things that I've shared with you today will bear fruit in your mind and your heart, and that we might all continue to go forward in the liberty that we have as Americans, born out of the liberty that those people found in our Savior Jesus Christ. And might we all hold this document high and be thankful for the freedom that we have because of the Bill of Rights. I'm going to just ask that you bow with me in a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it back over to the MCs. Lord, thank you for loving us. Thank you, dear God, for your mercy upon us. Thank you for the greatest nation on earth that you have entrusted to us, to our care, the United States of America. There's many people that would like to bring it to its demise, but Father, we know that you can make all the counsel of the heathen come to naught. You can bring all the devices of the people to none effect, because your counsel stands forever. So help us, Lord, to be that nation that you call blessed. Blessed is a nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. We believe that you chose America. Help us, dear God, to continue to make the right choices in our life. And thank you for these dear people that have come together to celebrate, to commemorate the Bill of Rights, so that we might pass the torch of liberty on to the next generation. And we'll thank you and pray this in the precious name of Jesus Christ. And all God's people said, Amen. Oh, I think I'm supposed to say one thing. I have some books back here called The Prayers That Shaped America. If you'd like one, I'd be glad to offer them to you for a gift of $15 a piece. Be glad to sign them. I authored them. It's the first book that we took in and gave to all the members of Congress. So it's a little bit of history. And if you want that, The Prayers That Shaped America, it's historical, basically aspect of our nation and what helped to make our nation what it is today. And so I was supposed to make that announcement. So, all right, Brother Dan.